Hello and welcome to the NTI PodTalk. My name is Diane Kaler and I'm Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. Join me as I talk to interesting people in the field of health and wellness, food and farming, and anywhere else we find conversations that matter to our community. By listening, you'll learn a little about NTI and a lot about the things and people around you that make a difference for your wellness. Welcome and let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Diane Kaler from Nutrition Therapy Institute, Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute, with another edition of the NTI PodTalk. We always have such wonderful guests on our PodTalk, and today is no exception. I'm so excited to talk to Margaret Floyd Barry, who is the Executive Director of Restorative Wellness Solutions, RWS. So we'll just get into the conversation. So Margaret, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Diane. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yeah. I really consider you a compatriot of mine in this field of nutrition education. Sometimes it feels like pushing water uphill to help people understand how important the role of nutrition is in their overall wellness goals and wellness outcomes. And it's always nice to talk to someone who's sort of in the trenches as well. So thank you so much. So speaking of that, I would love to hear your background and really how you got interested in the field of nutrition. Have you always been in the nutrition world, or did you do something else and then have a complete shift, which is what I did, but just curious what your background is.
Yeah, it's what many of us did. I
Yeah.
definitely have not always been in the nutrition field. I started off professionally in the field of corporate social responsibility. So I was working with companies to help them, have better relationships with their environment and their people and all this good stuff. And it was good work. I did a lot of business coaching as well. But it wasn't nutrition. And I loved food. That was sort of the one through line my whole life is I have always loved food and loved to eat. But it as a tool for healing is something that really I didn't even consider until much later in life. I had my first really powerful personal experience, as so many of us do, with the healing power of food when I was actually quite young. I was in my 20s. I'd had raging eczema, like head to toe, awful, managed kind of with cortisone creams. And I remember there was a very specific moment. I started getting it on my eyelids. And the doctor told me to just put the cortisone cream on my eyelids. And there was something instinctive that was just like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I just felt like I was going to kind of burn my eyelids off. I mean, I had no technical knowledge of anything, but I thought, this doesn't feel right.
Right.
And my business partner at the time, this is, long before, as I said, I was in this field. She said to me, have you ever considered addressing this naturally? And I was like, what does that even mean?
Right. Right.
And she sent me to a practitioner that she had worked with, and we did this major overhaul to my diet. We did, all these things. And within 3 weeks, that eczema went away. And I remember at the time I went in joking, oh, she's going to take away all my favorite food groups like coffee and alcohol and sugar and chocolate, and if it had only stopped there, right?
Right.
It was a massive, massive overhaul. But literally within 3 weeks, that eczema left and it has never come back. And that was a really like, holy cow, this something as seemingly disconnected from our skin as what we eat can have such a huge impact. Now, it took me a long time to get from there to actually changing careers. But that was the first moment. I also, my mom was very, very ill. She had 3 very severe autoimmune diseases. And I watched her over the course of about 20 years. She was on one hand this medical miracle, and on the other hand, she lost her life to side effects of those medications that were keeping her alive. And I just knew there needed to be a different way. So you put these two experiences side by side, and I ended up, when I was in my, I guess, early 30s, changing course and have never looked back.
Yeah. That is, as you said, so often how those of us in this field come to be interested in nutrition and then pursue
further education and realize that we can now, not only are we gaining this knowledge to help ourselves and our own family members, but also to turn it into a career, because so many people do come to the conclusion that, something is like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And I wonder if what I eat matters, in some way, shape, or form. They come to that conclusion. But so many people, the nutrition field, or the advice about nutrition has for a long time been confusing, conflicting, if not outright confusing, certainly outright conflicting in many areas, in many ways. And if they try to navigate this themselves, oftentimes they give up, because they're like, I don't know what to do. This place says eat this, this place says don't eat that, and I don't have any idea what to do, because they don't know. They don't have the education. And so they, if they give up trying to help themselves, they might, and it's becoming more common, that they do look for someone to help them. And so that's when they turn to a professional like us. And that is what is so sort of empowering, to be able to provide guidance and education and knowledge and tips, to have this meaningful impact if people try these suggestions. So I I think it's amazing. Like, every day I learn something new about the human body, or something really interesting, and how nutrition influences that. It's not a static thing. So I'm really excited about it, and I know you are too. So so amazing story. For me, my story was my son's health, when he was very young. And I came to it a lot, I mean, later than you did. I was 38 when I first started, like, making the connection that something is not right here. So but yeah, it's amazing, and very powerful, as your story is illustrative of. So all right, well, so as I said, you are the executive director of Restorative Wellness Solutions, RWS as we know it. Um, so tell us what RWS is, and then I really would like to understand kind of what was the initial impetus to start this endeavor in the first place. Like, what need does it fill in this field of nutrition and nutrition education?
You bet. Well, I think I'm going to start with the answer to that question, and I can take no credit for founding it. It was my former business partner, Ann Fisher Silva, who is an outstanding clinician. She has been working in this field for so long. And she and I were co-teaching for another nutrition school, and it was my first time meeting her. And I remember, I'd been practicing for about 4 or 5 years already, and I was getting, I'd say, really good results, like solid results with my clients, especially people who came to me eating the standard American diet. A lot of room to move, right?
Yes,
Processed
absolutely.
foods, you take someone in that kind of dietary paradigm, you teach them how to eat real whole foods, and there's some pretty powerful transformations.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had this client population who would come to me doing everything right
Mm-hmm.
already.
Mm-hmm.
They were on really clean diets. They were taking all the, quote unquote, right supplements, and they were still feeling like garbage. And I knew that there had to be a way to help them, but I couldn't figure out how, because I was at the end of my toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met Anne, we were teaching together. I remember we were teaching in person, and we had dinner together one night, and she's telling me a little bit about her practice and the kind of client she's working with. And the kind of client she was working with was the exact kind of client that I was really struggling with. She was getting these people who were incredibly sick. They'd been already through the rounds. They'd been to 10, sometimes 20, 30 other health professionals, both in the conventional medical model and in the complementary and alternative. Like, they'd done all the things, And then they would get results when they came to her. And the key difference with her is she used the same paradigm that I was working with. She used the same tools, the same approaches, the same, we believed in the same things. But the key difference is that she had layered on objective lab testing on top of that framework. And so she was able to get specific and targeted in a way, kind of get these insights into what was going on inside the client's body that we can't get from just symptom presentation alone. And she and I had both been trained in this kind of hands-on technique that in some cases was helpful, but in a lot of, when it got really complex, you'd reach your limits with it. So here she had added this objective lab data, and she'd had the opportunity to work inside a functional medicine practice. She had been mentored, and been around people using these tools, not for diagnostic purposes, which is a really important distinction, but really to kind of identify and understand the very specific imbalances in her client's physiology that could then be corrected, manipulating the diet, bringing in supplementation, having lifestyle changes. And she was just getting these knock it out of the park results. She had a wait list months long. And she was kind of scratching her head going like, how am I here, this nutritionist in, Northern California at the time? She's like, how am I, this little nutritionist, getting these outstanding results? And she would look around at a lot of colleagues who had similar training, but without the labs, who were struggling. They weren't having the same kind of knock it out of the park results, especially with this client population. And she just casually mentioned, oh, I'm thinking of doing a training program. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, please. I want to learn everything and I want to be able to add it on to what I do. And so she, at that next year, Restorative Wellness Solutions had its first, or maybe it was 2 years later, had its first class. I was in that first class, and it just completely enhanced. I'm not going to say changed the way I practice, because it wasn't the paradigm shift. What it was is an additional layer of data, very granular data, that just allowed me to be much more specific. So if I have somebody who's coming to me and they've been eating, the GAPS diet for the last 3 years, and they're sensitive to so many different foods and still having all these digestive issues, and, but they're taking, as I said, all the quote unquote right supplements, like they are on the surface doing all the things right. Without that extra layer of data, I don't know what to do with them. But now we have the extra layer of data, and suddenly this whole world of next steps opens up. So that's, the need that she was filling was to serve this community of nutrition professionals who want to work with the people who are quite ill and want to be able to go a lot deeper with the tools that we all have. These fantastic, I was just speaking at a big event for functional medicine practitioners last week, and I got on stage and said, let's face it, at the heart of functional medicine, which is getting a lot more airtime these days, is functional nutrition, right? We can add on all the fancy tools, the biohacking, the peptides, like all of these things on top of it. But at the core of it, at the heart, what we're talking about is nutrition. And the people who are the best equipped to do this work are people like you and me, people who have been trained inside and out on how to work with diet, with supplementation. When you add that additional layer of information of objective lab data, it's unbelievable the kind of results that we can get with what I think sometimes gets dismissed and lost because of some of the fancy technologies or things. But really, I think what we do is the absolute core of functional medicine overall. And so that's the need that it's meeting. And we've seen it now. We've trained over 1,300 practitioners, and just seeing consistently that when you layer on this additional type of data, it just unlocks the potential of our core tools even further.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is a really powerful way to talk about it, I think. And you only allow people to take your program if they've already had previous certification in some sort of nutrition program, because you're not starting at the very base. You are doing that advanced extra education. And so I mean, we get people who are like, yeah, I really wanted to do RWS, but I found out that I have to have previous certification to do it. And so, they come to school at NTI and then they go through RWS. So, if you could give us kind of an overview, I know that there are 4 modules. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you call them, but 4 separate sort of, I don't know if they're standalone or if they are required consecutive things, but if you could talk about that, kind of the framework of your training program.
You bet. So there are 4 different, we call them levels, but different
Levels,
programs.
okay.
And each one, they are independent, although they need to be done in a specific order. So each one or the first 3 of them are all 12-week-long intensives, and they really are intensive. We are always telling folks this is not because we all get the webinar from the different supplement companies or what have you, and it's like the thing that you've got on in the background as you're doing the dishes or folding the
Right.
laundry, right?
Exactly.
That's not this course at all.
Yeah.
It's very intense, it's very in-depth, and because we require that you already have your foundational training, we can go deep, and we do very quickly. So it's these 12-week intensives. And the first one, it's all about gastrointestinal healing. So we do a deep dive. We know that, the gut is the mother of the body. It's just so absolutely essential to all health presentations. So we do a deep dive, and each course is structured where we do a deep dive into the anatomy and physiology so that we're all on the same page and know what proper function looks like, as well as the different ways that dysfunction can manifest. From there, we layer on that objective lab testing. And the tests that we look at in our gastrointestinal healing, we focus mostly on the GI map tool. There's a lot of different great GI tests out there for the price point. We're always making decisions based on the combination of something that's both affordable but gives us clinically what we need to get the best results. So the GI map is the one that we do a deep dive on, although we do also teach some of the older culture-based stool tests as well as SIBO testing. So we do a deep dive into that test and how to use it. It's very different from when you go to the lab and get some basic training. Like, we're really talking about how to work with this in the context of your client's symptom presentation. We're giving you a really powerful clinical framework within which you can use it. And understanding how to then work with that next to, we also teach how to work with food sensitivity testing. So we do deep dive into the different types of food sensitivity tests. One of the things in our day and age with testing, so much of this is marketed direct to consumer, and so much of these tests are driven by marketing. And we want our practitioners to be able to look past the marketing, to be able to understand the mechanisms that is being evaluated. So that's not just use this test, don't use that test. It's what are each of these tests looking for? What are the mechanisms? What's the technology? What is the kind of information it will give you? What is the kind of information it will not give you? So that they're equipped to make those decisions about what makes the most sense in that clinical context. And then we always do give lots of case studies and show how to not just interpret the tests and work with the data that we get within it, but then how do you take that information, understand it within the context of your client's symptom presentation and health goals, and then craft a highly customized healing protocol that's going to involve dietary changes, it's going to involve supplements, and it's going to involve lifestyle changes. How do we pull all of that together so we create something that's very specific for that client in front of you? One of the things that makes our class both unique and also very challenging is that we really are fostering critical thinking. And some people don't like that. They want the answer. But as we both know, there isn't an answer. Every client in front of you is an N of one, and you need to be able to think critically. You need to be able to pull together the pieces of information that you have from them, both based on their symptom presentation, their health history, the food journal you're looking at, all of these different pieces, plus the labs, which is just one piece of the puzzle. Sometimes people get all enamored with numbers on a page and they start
Right.
chasing numbers, and that's not what
Right.
we're trying to do here, right? It's just an additional layer of information. So we teach very comprehensively the process of critical thinking of how you put this together to come up with a really effective plan to support your client through those changes. So that's the overall model, and every class is structured that way. We do a deep dive into the anatomy, look at what function looks like, what dysfunction, how that manifests, and then we teach the tests in a way to understand what that, really understand what kind of information that test will give us, what the different markers mean, how we can look at patterns, and then how do you take this and translate it into something that's going to help you get your clients better faster? Because that's what this is all about, right? It's about the client's well-being and helping them to get their health goals as quickly and effectively and sustainably as possible.
Yeah.
So that's our entry level. Everyone starts with gut. And then from there, it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure. You can either go into our blood chemistry class, or you can go into our hormones class. Our blood chemistry class, a blood chemistry panel gives us really incredibly comprehensive information on all sorts of body systems. So from blood sugar handling, cardiovascular health, anemias and nutritional deficiencies, immune health, thyroid health, kidneys, adrenals, liver and gallbladder. There's, we're able to get some really good information on all of these systems. So we unpack that in that class. And then the hormones class, we are looking at, we use both salivary testing as well as the Dutch, and teach how to work with the data from those to support adrenals and the overall HPA axis. We look at this in the context of male hormones. And then for females, cycling female hormones, perimenopause, and postmenopause. And with that postmenopause, we also have a whole section on bone health. And then the very last class, you have to have done all 3 of these in order to qualify for our last class, which is our capstone class. And this is where it's actually a 15-week class. It's a little more intense. And this is where we do a deep dive into the more advanced concepts like genetics, deep detoxification. So there we're looking at, molds and heavy metals and environmental and chemical toxins, autoimmunity, and neurological considerations. Frankly, each one of those could be its own 12-week course.
Yeah. Right.
But we've sort of brought out the key concepts for each one of those. It's quite an advanced deep dive. And so those are the 4 core levels of curriculum. And there's no requirement to take all 4. You can take 1 or 2 or 4, it really, and we do them in live cohort models. So there's a whole group of students going through at the same time. We have weekly webinars. We have office hours a couple of times each week. So lots of touch points, lots of opportunity to connect with others in the class, to connect with their instructor, to really get their questions answered, recognizing that these are very advanced tools that we're teaching. So we want to make sure people really understand how to use them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to talk about something that I think it brings up an issue that a lot of people have questions about, but also makes me a little apprehensive. And that is that, there is this whole legal framework in which nutrition therapists are not licensed medical practitioners. And so when you start talking about doing lab testing, that and it depends on different states too, that puts people in a potentially precarious position where they, once again, depending on the state they're in, could raise some red flags that might, might raise the attention of someone that could potentially get them in trouble. And so I think it's really important that we talk about that. And I'd like to hear from your point of view. How do you navigate this situation? Because, there's a whole scope of practice thing out there. So I don't want to put any words in your mouth. I just would love to hear how you navigate that.
It's a really, really important issue. And I'm really glad you brought it up, because it is a fine line that we're walking, and we need to be very, very clear on how we are using these tests, what kind of information it's giving us, and what we're going to be doing with that information. it used to be a big, the biggest question I would get asked is, how do you get access to these tests? And the
Right.
reality is access. Anybody, your clients can get access. Anyone can get access to any test they want, right? It's
That's
not about
right.
access.
Yep.
And it is an invaluable additional layer of information. But the paradigm that we're working with and the language that we're working with is completely different from a licensed medical doctor, right? They are using labs to diagnose pathology.
Yes.
And that is absolutely not what we were doing, nor would we want to. I always get pushback.
Right.
People say, oh, this is just semantics. You're using different language for the same thing. Now, language is incredibly important. So I'm not going to dismiss the fact that language is important, but this is much more than semantics. This is work, there's different types of tests will create different types of challenges. But I'm going to use a blood chemistry as a good example, because a blood chemistry panel is a panel that pretty much every doctor runs. It is used medically all around the world, is very well established, very credible, all of these things, which can be quite powerful. We are using the information from that blood chemistry panel in a completely different way. The two key questions that we are seeking to ask as nutrition professionals is, number one, what is blocking my client's ability to heal? We know that we have a powerful innate mechanism of healing. And if we're not thriving, something is getting in the way of that. Can this lab and the information therein give us clues as to what might be blocking the body's ability to heal? And secondly, we know that we know that in order to heal, we need to be in homeostasis. We need to achieve that sense of homeostasis. And so what imbalances exist that we can correct via manipulating the diet, working strategically with supplementation, maybe adjusting certain lifestyle and behaviors that can then bring the body back into balance so that it can heal from the inside out. Those are the questions that we are looking to ask when we are looking at any lab. That is very different from what disease state are we diagnosing, and how close to it are you? And there's places where it's a fine line. I'll give an example of blood sugar imbalances. So we will look and we will see evidence of blood sugar imbalances. Now, we're never going to tell a client you have insulin resistance, or you have metabolic syndrome, or you are pre-diabetic. Those are words that we don't ever want to say.
Right.
But that information is very powerful in letting us know the degree of dysregulation and blood sugar handling, which of course is, the diet is absolutely essential in the first course of action and helping to correct that.
Yeah.
Right. So understanding how we're using it, and that we're using it to inform and get more granular and more specific in working with the tools that we are the best trained to work with, as opposed to that diagnostic piece. In fact, diagnoses, we sometimes we run a very thorough thyroid panel. And sometimes we come across, antibodies, for example, and we run across patterns that could be indicative of Hashimoto's. We will never tell a client that they have Hashimoto's, but understanding that, and do we care if they have a diagnosis? Not really. We always say, share these lab results with your client or with your doctor so that they can look at it from the medical perspective. So we're always encouraging our clients to have, and we do this verbally as well as in written form. And there's a lot of different ways you want to protect yourself, both verbally and in written form. So communication is really key here, but have their medical doctors look at it from that medical perspective, and they can handle the diagnoses. But that information about, is there an immune component if we see some thyroid dysregulation, that's really helpful, because that informs what we're going to do from a dietary perspective and a supplement perspective, right? that helps us to get more targeted and more specific with our recommendations, but it's not with a view to making any kind of diagnoses. So I think it's really important to understand that the information is the same information, but used for completely different purposes. I mean, there's a lot of places that our the information we use overlaps with medical professionals. We do a health intake, right? Like we're asking all sorts of questions on symptom presentation. So does a medical doctor, but we're asking those questions for different ends and to use that information in a different way. And it's the same thing with labs. But we do have to be very careful because we never want to be accused of practicing medicine without a license. That is a criminal offense. And that will, that can result in time in jail, right? And that's not, this is not something to laugh at and to just like brush off. We have to take this very seriously. But it is really like the way that we are doing this. And we harp on this all the time. When we're in our classes, if anyone says, oh, I prescribed this supplement. No,
Yes.
nope, you did not prescribe anything. You made a recommendation, or,
That's exactly right.
how would we treat this? You don't treat anything, my friend. That is not what we're here to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that as nutrition professionals, because we're not licensed, I actually think there's a real power in that because we are far less likely to slip into what I call green allopathy. When you have somebody who's, and this is not a slam on functional medicine doctors, but when you have that medical background and that perspective that has been really locked in of looking for diagnoses and treating disease, it can be easy to slip into the pattern of, well, here's a disease, here's a symptom, I'm going to treat it, but rather than treating it with medication, I'm going to treat it with like an herb or a supplement. And that's not actually getting to the root of anything either. I mean, it might be a less harmful intervention, but we're not actually looking at the root cause of things and really supporting the body from the inside out to just do what it does best, which is to heal when it's got the proper tools to do so. So because we are nutrition professionals and we can't treat, it really helps us to, I mean, we're kind of forced to look from the inside out. And honestly, that's the place where we see the most magnificent transformations. Otherwise, it's just whack-a-mole of endless symptom management, which none of us are interested in doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any states that are so restrictive that your students and graduates are going to be unable to practice? Like, do you talk about that, or?
There's 3 states where direct access testing gets really complicated, and it's changing day by day, lab by lab. So I'm not going to give blanket statements, but New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, it's very complicated. There's a lot of different creative ways to do this. Some people will partner with doctors. Some people will establish practices out of state. Like there's different ways of doing this. So some states are much more challenging than others, and New York is the most restrictive. In New Jersey, there are some labs that you can work with, others that you can't. So it really varies state by state. And all of the direct access lab testing companies, and this is actually, for medical providers as well. New York is it's just a pain. But they're constantly looking for ways to be able to support people effectively still. So we do have practitioners in all different states, and they just have to organize it, sort of they structure things a little bit differently. And so, it really depends on, there's so many different factors there. It's not possible. And I'm not a legal expert, but it depends on where you are, where your clients are, whose license you are working under. There's a lot of complicating pieces to it. But what I would say is if anyone is in one of those 3 states and would like to do this work, there's labs that we can give you contacts with, and you can have conversations with them to see what your options are.
Great. Good. All right. Well, this has been really good information, and I think our community will find it valuable and recognize that, after they finish at NTI, there is still opportunity for more education that can help them with that strategic targeting of those clients where they have hit a threshold but still haven't achieved their goals. So that's awesome. I have another topic that I want to talk about that I'm kind of on a kick about talking about with people, but I just want to make sure that if there's anything else you want to talk about specifically about RWS before we move on.
No, that's okay. It's been great. Yeah,
that's great. So I have been maybe for whatever reason, I am more noticing, but I really do feel like it's becoming more prevalent that discussions, even in the mainstream, are becoming more it is becoming more evident that there is this growing acceptance of the fact that the American diet is bad. The standard American diet is bad, is crappy. And not only are these highly processed foods that make up, some huge percentage, 70, 75, some people say 80% of the American diet, not only are they nutrient deficient and insufficient in their ability to support optimal health, but they actually have components to them that are, I'm going to use the word add to the toxicity that we have to deal with. So it's not just that they're not healthy, it's that they actually cause, health problems.
Mhm.
But like, I have just, I don't know how many, it's really been only months. It really hasn't been years, but months of, in my gathering of knowledge, I am seeing a much greater acceptance in the mainstream about the fact that this exists and about the need to do something. And I am incredibly inspired about this. Almost hopeful, like I can actually say I'm hopeful that maybe something is going to change. Have you been seeing the same thing, or is this just something that I am suddenly just sort of waking up to, and it's been out there for a while? I don't know. I just see a lot of it happening very recently.
I think there's a huge increase in awareness that the food that is sort of the mainstream processed foods are not only not additive, but actually negative and harmful. I
Yeah.
think, there's been a big stir this week. I'm sure you saw in the news that Siete Foods was bought by Pepsi for $1.2 billion.
Yes,
And this
that's
has
right.
caused a big, I actually think it's fantastic. Because what that tells us, it's a really, really important signal. Pepsi doesn't care where it makes its money.
Mm-hmm.
Pepsi wants to make money where it sees the attention is going. And the fact that a company like Siete Foods, which is doing an outstanding job of creating really clean, delicious products,
Mm-hmm.
they see the potential there. Now, there are definitely going to be the skeptics saying, oh, they're going to change it, this and that. They would be absolutely foolish to change it, because the reason why Siete has been as successful as it has is because of this combination of incredibly high quality ingredients, simple ingredients, and delicious products.
Mm-hmm.
My bet is that they're not going to mess with anything. And they see, I'm not going to name any names, but there are very well-known organizations in our industry that are starting to be backed by pharma. And again, this is, I think, a testament to the fact that there's a tide change happening. There's a lot of different contributing factors, but there's evidence of things that work. And these companies they're not out to try to do harm. They just want to make money.
Right.
That's what they're there for. And love it or hate it, that is their overall objective. But if they are seeing enough of an appetite and an uptake in consumer purchasing behavior that a company like Pepsi would spend $1.2 billion, I think that's the biggest buyout we've had in this space of, sort of conventional big food, investing in these food. We see companies like Primal Kitchen was bought out not for 1.2 billion. I think it was like 350, 400 million. They haven't changed the ingredients on that at all. It's just increased distribution. Epic Bars and Epic Food, exact same thing, still clean, but now just greater resources going into it. So I don't think that we need to worry. I think we might have needed to worry, and we did need to worry, 10, 15 years ago, where there wasn't as much consumer education, but there's a lot more consumer education. And I think that I agree with you. I think it's actually really hopeful. I love that, like, functional medicine is becoming trendy. That is what we need. We need good health to become trendy by and accepted and supported by the biggest money out there. And it's complicated because pride ourselves on, we like to be kind of the rebels and and all that kind of stuff. And that's really important to continue pioneering. And there's always going to be small companies pushing the edge and pushing the envelope. And that's an incredibly important role. And I agree. I think we're seeing a shift, and I find it really encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, this is stuff that, I've been talking about for more than 20 years. I'm sure you've been talking about it. It's not like we're going to change our understanding or our emphasis on nutrition in a different way. It's still going to be the same. It's just that the mainstream is actually moving into this same space and this same direction. And so now, I feel like totally validated and vindicated in what I've been talking about for 20 years. I had a guy, it was earlier this summer, probably in August or maybe July. And he sort of knew that I have something to do with nutrition, but he didn't really know exactly what I do. But and he walks up to me, he's like, yeah, I'm just learning about this new thing that, we need to be careful about the oils that we're eating and, the refined seed oils. And like, this is a whole new thing. And people are really changing their minds on this. And I'm like, I've been talking about that for 25 years. Like, it's not new to me. He's like, really? I said, yeah. He's like, oh, well, and so it was just really funny and made me hopeful that even this very sort of guy who's just learning about this stuff as if it's brand new. He's coming up and wanting to talk to someone about it without really even knowing what my background is. So I'm just so excited to see where it goes and what happens with it. And I recently came to learn that 2 years ago in 2022, there was this legislative effort to require medical schools to do nutrition training in their programs. And it hasn't passed and got into sort of law or any sort of actionable item in the federal government. But I mean, even they are recognizing that, the government is recognizing that we need to do something because these medical costs that people are having to pay themselves, but also that the government is having to pay in, social, medical, healthcare plans and that kind of stuff. It is just exorbitant, and it is exceeding the capacity for long-term sustainability of our economic survival. So I am thrilled about it.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. I want to give you the last word and tell people how they can find out about restorative wellness and anything else that you're doing and all the different places where they can find you.
Absolutely. So our main website is restorativewellnesssolutions.com. If you want to check out in more, we have the curriculum is listed up there. If you want to check out in more detail about our entry-level program, which is the gastrointestinal healing, you can go to masterguthealing.com, and that gives you a lot more sort of deep dive into that particular course. Follow us on Instagram at Restorative Wellness Solutions. You could follow me personally on Instagram at Margaret Floyd Barry. That's a Barry, Barry, not the berries that we eat. We're doing some really cool things, and would love any of your group who would like to, take the fantastic training that they have done with you and bring these additional tools. We've had many of your alumni come through our program. Some of our star instructors, some of our most successful practitioners have come through your program first. They complement each other really beautifully. So if you're wanting to do that deeper clinical work, if you're wanting to help people who are really struggling with some pretty significant and severe chronic health issues, we would love to connect with you.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. And I'm so happy to hear that our graduates are having such an impact on your community as well. So that's awesome.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Margaret. It was wonderful talking to you.
You as well. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Diane Kaler here again. If you found this conversation interesting and haven't already become a student at NTI, check us out at ntischool.com. We hope to see you soon.